Before we start today's lesson, you will need a pen, some paper and exercise book, and unless you're viewing this video on a mobile phone, turn off all mobile phones and remove any distractions. Welcome to today's lesson, where we will look at anaerobic respiration and fermentation. We are continuing with our topic question, how do living things breathe and respire to stay alive? But in today's lesson, we'll look specifically at anaerobic respiration and what effect this has on muscles. But first of all, let's see what you can remember from the previous lesson. Here's 5 questions on a starter. I'll give you 3 minutes to answer them. How did you get on then? Grab a red pen and let's have a look at the answers. So the reactants of aerobic respiration are oxygen and glucose, and the products are carbon dioxide and water. Which organisms carry it out? Well, all organisms carry out respiration. When is it carried out? It's carried out all the time. And 5 uses of the energy that it produces, that could be forming new molecules, it could be growth, it could be repair, it could be keeping warm, it could be movement, it could be production of hair. So take a moment. If you need to correct any of those answers, then just pause the video and do so. Let's remind ourselves then why respiration is so important. Respiration uses glucose and oxygen and produces carbon dioxide and water. We need energy, the useful product of respiration, for everything we do. We need energy to make new things like body cells and hair. We need it to grow. We need it to move. We need it to keep warm. And if you remember from last lesson, then the glucose for respiration we get from our food and predominantly carbohydrates. The oxygen we get from breathing in via inhalation. And we get rid of the waste products, carbon dioxide and water, through exhalation. Hopefully you will also remember that because this process uses oxygen, it is aerobic respiration. But what happens if we can't get enough oxygen? Well, then our bodies undergo a process called anaerobic respiration. This is when the body cannot supply the cells with enough oxygen to break down the glucose. So we carry this out anaerobically, that is without oxygen. In this process, the glucose reacts to form a product called lactic acid and also release our energy. This isn't as efficient as aerobic respiration because all the glucose doesn't fully break down. We'll also see that lactic acid is toxic to our bodies. Have you ever noticed then how you feel tired when exercising? This is due to anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration produces a product called lactic acid. This soaks it into the muscle cells and prevents muscles from doing their job. That might cause you to feel tired, and sometimes maybe you would experience cramp. But apart from tired, how else might you feel after exercise? I'll give you a moment to have a think about that. That's right, you might be out of breath, you might be panting, you might be breathing heavily, and there's a reason for this. So why are you out of breath? Well, our bodies need lots of oxygen to get rid of the lactic acid that's built up in your body. You don't want to keep that lactic acid. And what happens is that after exercise, when you've produced lactic acid, that will react with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. Sometimes this is called an oxygen debt because your body is using glucose to produce energy when you don't have enough oxygen. So that's a debt. And at the end of the exercise, you need to pay that debt back. And you do that by breathing heavily and taking in more oxygen, which is why you will continue to be out of breath even once you've finished exercising. Let's summarise these two processes then. So we have anaerobic respiration, which uses glucose and produces lactic acid and energy. And then after exercise, we need to break down lactic acid, and we use oxygen to do that, and we produce carbon dioxide and water. And for those of you that like maths, you would see that if we combine these two equations, then the lactic acid appears on both sides. So we could cancel that out and get back to our equation for respiration. So this is another route which allows us to respire without using oxygen. Okay then, time for you to record some of this then. So there's 6 questions there. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to answer them. Please either copy out the question and add your answer, or write your answer in full sentences. Off you go. let's have a look how we got on then. So on the first question, what is anaerobic respiration and when does it happen? Well, anaerobic respiration is the process of releasing energy from glucose without the use of oxygen. It happens when the body's been exercising for a long period of time and the lungs are not able to take in enough oxygen. During anaerobic respiration, we will make lactic acid. The thing we don't use during anaerobic respiration is oxygen. How does the amount of energy compare then? Well, less energy is released during anaerobic respiration, and that's due to the incomplete breakdown of glucose. What happens once the exercise is finished? Well, when the exercise is finished, the body needs to break down the lactic acid using oxygen, and that is why you would breathe heavily and your body takes in more oxygen to pay back the oxygen debt. And finally, the word equation is glucose producing lactic acid and energy. If you need to pause the video at this point, then please do so. Okay then, so anaerobic respiration can also take place in plants and some microbial cells in the presence of little or no oxygen. Examples of this might happen in the roots of plants, and particularly if they're in waterlogged soils, and bacteria in puncture wounds. Anaerobic respiration can also occur in some plant cells and microorganisms and produce ethanol and carbon dioxide. This is instead of the lactic acid that we humans produce. The word equation for this is glucose reacting to form ethanol and carbon dioxide and some energy. This process is also called fermentation. We are now going to watch a short video that will explain the process of fermentation.
Can you name a type of fungus that is important in the diet of humans? I bet most of you thought mushrooms. However, there is a fungus that is arguably more common in human food. Any idea what it is? In this video, we're going to look at anaerobic respiration by yeast and how it can be harnessed to produce food. Yeast is a type of fungus. Like all living things, it respires. Yeast can respire anaerobically, so without oxygen. Another word for this is fermentation. When yeast respires anaerobically, this is what happens. The yeast uses glucose as a fuel to produce carbon dioxide, ethanol, or alcohol, and energy. The energy that is produced by fermentation is useful to the yeast, as the yeast then uses this for metabolic processes such as growth. However, the carbon dioxide and ethanol are waste products for the yeast, but useful products for humans. One way humans use the fact that yeast fermentation produces carbon dioxide is in bread making. Yeast is mixed with flour, sugar, salt, and water to make dough. The yeast then respires anaerobically, producing carbon dioxide. Bubbles of carbon dioxide are trapped in the dough of the bread. This makes the bread rise, resulting in a lovely soft, bouncy loaf of bread. Yum! Why do you think sugar is added to the dough? Pause the video to have a think about this. Sugar is added because it is the fuel for respiration. No sugar would mean the yeast is unable to respire. Respiring yeast produces alcohol, so why don't people get drunk when eating bread? When the bread is baked, the yeast is killed and the ethanol evaporates. Can evaporating ethanol help you think of another use for yeast? Yeast is also used in the production of beers and wines. This time, useful waste material is ethanol. To make beer, barley grains are soaked in water to cause them to germinate. This is known as malting. The malted grain is ground, which activates enzymes that turn the starches in the grain into sugars. The mashed barley is then boiled, and hops are added to give flavour. As the mixture cools, yeast is added. The yeast fungus consumes the sugars from the grains and starts to produce carbon dioxide and alcohol. The beer is usually filtered and the yeast is recycled to make more beer. So we've had yeast to make bread, and barley hops and yeast to making beer. What about wine? Wine can be made at home in a demijohn. Why do you think bubbles are visible? Why do you think there is an airlock in the neck of the demijohn? Pause the video to discuss this. The bubbles show that carbon dioxide is being produced as the yeast respires anaerobically. The airlock has two purposes. It allows the carbon dioxide out of the demijohn so that it doesn't explode. It also prevents air from entering the demijohn, ensuring the yeast continues to respire anaerobically and is not contaminated by other microorganisms. Hopefully, you now agree that yeast is a very beneficial microorganism that humans have learnt to use to our advantage, not only as mushrooms on our pizzas, but for making bread, beer, and wine.
If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Comment below if you have any questions. Why not check out our FuseSchool app as well? Until next time.
Okay, so thinking about the video then, I would like you to write a description of anaerobic respiration in plants and microbes. Now I'd like you to do this in your own words, but you can use the sentence starters that are on the slide now, and you must make sure that you include the keywords that are on the right hand side. Again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this. Okay, so things you might have wrote. Anaerobic respiration takes place in plants and some microbial cells in the presence of little or no oxygen. Examples of this include the roots of plants in waterlogged soils and bacteria in puncture wounds. Instead of lactic acid, this produces ethanol and carbon dioxide. The word equation is glucose reacting to form ethanol plus carbon dioxide and energy. This is also called fermentation.